Hey Saints, good morning. It's been a few days here since the last video. I got intrigued by something a few days ago and just thought I'd share it. I'm reading this Unseen Realm book by Dr. Michael Heiser. Um, and I'm not a super avid reader of, I don't know what you call these kind of books, but these uh, books that are based on theology, looking at the Bible. Um, I tend to more look at the Bible itself, trying to solve something or understand something, and then go out and look at commentary. But I do own a lot of books. What I tend to do is read the first 50 to 70 pages or whatever, see what point they're trying to make. And it's been my experience that a lot of times they make the core points in the first, half dozen chapters or whatever, and then you get a bunch of examples of how it's so, and that's where I tend to fall off the ledge because I either, would come into agreement with what they're saying in the book, and then all the pile-on examples don't seem to matter to me as much, or I would disagree somewhere along the way, or not like what they're saying, and then I give up on the book anyways. And so that's, maybe a bad reading practice, but that's kind of the way I'm going. But I got intrigued by this Unseen Realm book. Skywatch TV have been promoting it. Um, and this Dr. Michael Heiser, his background, he's this is his website, and he's post his background. He's, theologian. He's got a PhD in Hebrew and Semitic studies, which actually becomes interesting in this book. And then his dissertation uh, was on, this notion that's in this book, which is the divine council. Um, Here he's talking about the divine council in late canonical and non-canonical Second Temple Jewish literature. And that's the basis of this book, which ends up being really interesting. And he's currently working at this Logos Bible software, which your pastor, if you're going to a brick and mortar church, likely has a subscription to this. It's fairly popular, and so he's the um, reviewing academic content and creating the digital tools for the classroom, and then he's adjunct lecturer and professor at a bunch of locations. And so this guy's all credentialed up. And so I bring that to you because he says some stuff, he points to some stuff that fires me up, and it gives me a little bit of confidence. A bunch of the videos that I've done, people have done, that can be debated. And I had this happen to me with an actual theologian. Now his wasn't in ancient Hebrew or Semitic study. His was in, I forget the way he professed it, but it had to do with the preaching end of, presenting and preaching. I forget how his title was, but he got my grill once on the Benai Elohim, the sons of God, and it was really fun as I was reading this book here, as Michael Heiser breaks apart the usage of that term in the Old Testament, and what a defense against what I was being criticized for, and then he took the same view, which kind of fired me up again. So I'm recommending the book. It's not written super technical. I think anybody can read it, and it has a whole bunch of gold nuggets. I'm only 70, 80 pages in, and there's just a bunch of gold nuggets in this thing. And speaks into an area that's always kind of unclear, I think, for somebody, even that somebody that studies the Bible a lot. There's some of these questions. In particular, he's looking at how is the organization of heaven set up and how are decisions being made. And so that's the core of it, but he gets into all sorts of other things. I just want to expose you to a little bit of it, and so if it intrigues you, I bought the electronic copy because I didn't want to wait for the hardcover to show up. There's not much of a discount in this one for the electronic copy. It's just that I could get it, and start reading right away. I'll just give you a little taste of this. So the unseen realm. So one of the references is Psalm 82. Psalm of Asaph, who is a seer. God standeth in the congregation of the mighty. He judges among the gods. And, this is fun right out of the gate. He judges among the Elohim. We'll talk about that in a minute. How long will you judge unjustly? Accept the persons of the wicked. Defend the poor and the fatherless. Do justice to the afflicted and the needy. Deliver the poor and needy. Rid them out of the hand of the wicked. They know not, neither will they understand. They walk on in darkness. All the foundation of the earth are out of course. But I have said, ye are gods. I just want to show you these things because they're notions that probably, break maybe your conception. You are Elohim. And all of you are children of the Most High. And there's another interesting little phrase. But ye shall die like men and fall like one of the princes. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for thou shalt inherit the nations. Okay, and so that's kind of the kicking off. And so his point is the Shema, I think it is, O Lord, you God are one, that the Jewish folks recite every day. That's still in effect. When he goes through these examples, God is this uber ultra set apart. He's God, the infinite, right? But that word that's applied sometimes to, the Trinity, this Elohim, when he looks at all these passages, like the one I just read you here, and showed you how, other things are gods or other things are Elohim. When he breaks it down, what it is if your natural state is heavenly or the heavenly realm, you are Elohim. God, like I'm saying, the Trinity, though, is separated out and higher above, and yet their natural state is Elohim. And so, yes, Elohim is applied to, the Trinity, but Elohim is also applied to the rest of the angelic order. And so there's lots of little insights about how Elohim is used. But what he starts doing is he starts showing that there's structure in heaven. There's the Trinity, and then there's this divine council, just what we read here. There's the congregation of the mighty that judges among the gods. So a divine council. And then there's the messengers, what we frequently just say angels. And that's really what angel means, is the messengers of God. But there's this rank and ordering in heaven. And God actually allows the divine council to participate in the decision making of how heaven and earth get ruled. And this is what the cool thing is then he goes in and he shows how, different decisions are being made in heaven. And yes, God is sovereign, and he demonstrates that, but he also demonstrates how the free will in the decision making of heaven and on earth, God allows that to occur so that we're not robots, so that we're participating. God will decree an outcome he wants, but then how you get there is part and parcel of what the divine council participates in. Okay, so and then a couple other things I'll point out, and obviously in a 15, 20-minute video, I'm not going to be able to drain a 400-page book, and I'm only 70 pages in. But I just wanted to do a little bit of a sneak peek because I think it would tweak a bunch of people that are on my channel. You get a lot of confirmation of stuff that you probably believe anyways, but it's reinforced with some pretty heavy duty word study and rigor, which makes you feel good about what you've learned. And then you learn some stuff that just is kind of mind blowing. It breaks some of the assumptions maybe that we've been carrying around for a while, which I think is really good. So Genesis 6, the passages we all love to crawl into here. When it come to pass that men began to multiply in the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God, this is the classic one that everybody digs into, B'nai Elohim, sons of God, saw the daughters of men, they were fair, and they took them wives, all which they chose. And so he goes into that and demonstrates, sons of God is this divine counsel notion, or he actually validates some of the biblical interpretation too by looking at books that maybe we would have taken for granted on this. He looks at the book of Enoch and the Watchers, not from a canonical, part of canon viewpoint, but from saying contemporary Semitic literature of the time when, the Bible was being written would confirm the understanding of what of what's in the Bible, which I think is great because that's the way we would do it, just being non-scholars. And this is the little debate that I got into as well, because I took that position that the sons of God were angelic and not the sons of Seth back here, from Genesis 5, I think, where Seth is introduced and all that, maybe 4. And you to get this, biblically, Scripture interprets Scripture. So you go to Job, and then 6. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. Well, I'd like to see how the sons of Seth, the Sethites, would present themselves in front of God, and then Satan joining them. That's where some of this stuff, the classic historical Christian teaching that goes back to, as Dr. Michael Heiser says, I think it was the 4th century AD, was just flawed. He points to Augustine probably being one of the people that misdirected everybody back then, and then everybody just took that as a more comfortable interpretation because you didn't have to think about the supernatural, angelic order coming to earth and all this type of thing. And then it gets repeated here in Job 2:1. And again there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. And so this is, a couple of descriptions right here of, God, but then this divine counsel kind of concept. And then the Satan comes in and presents himself. And we'll talk about this in a minute, but Satan is maybe not exactly what we think it is. And we'll get to that in a minute. And then just finishing off in Job 38:7. When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. And this is in reference to the creation of the heaven or of the earth, and noting that, obviously there was no man at that time, and the morning stars being another reference to the angelic realm and the sons of God shouting for joy. And so, there's lots of examples here that he was using, and more than what I've showed you, of the divine council. And then how the ranking comes into making decisions. And he points to 1 Kings 22 and a bunch of them where he shows decisions being made from a heavenly perspective and then enacted down on earth. And, again, in the scope of this video, I couldn't get into all of his examples. Another neat one, which is a translation problem, and for people that have elevated the the King James or something to divine authorship, I think it was Holy Spirit led for sure, the translation. This might actually be an error in the base Hebrew text, and let's just go take a look at Deuteronomy 32:8, because you wouldn't get this unless you had 32:8, sorry, unless you had somebody that had all the resources that this Dr. Michael Heiser has. So when the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. And that's, post Tower of Babel, dispersion. And then God will select out for himself Abraham's, and Abraham's descendants. And he goes into all this type of thing about, how that one grouping was his to the Lord, his selected, called out group. But this children of Israel is the problem in this translation, and the English is fine. It's a base text problem. Israel, the children of Israel, B'nai Israel, that's fine. But what he says is, you go into like the Septuagint, for instance. Hang on. And although we don't have the Greek here, we have the English translation of the Greek, and it says, sets the bounds of the nations according to the number of angels of God. And he brings out a bunch of examples where this is probably what the base text is saying. And it fits then if you read the book of Enoch and that type of thing. This is the watchers, or this is the part of the divine council. But the 70 groupings weren't based on the tribes of Israel, but he was putting in place watcher angels for each one of the tribes, and then taking, Abraham's descendants for himself. And then, as the story goes, and which makes sense, the 70 watcher angels become fallen or apostate, and then the different tribes are starting to worship the angel, or the, he wouldn't use angel, I don't think. He would say it's part of this heavenly council, or the second order below God, is where the corruption came again. And then he gives examples of that and how they started becoming worshipped and that type of thing. So that was a pretty cool insight for me, is I always thought that when God dispersed after the Tower of Babel, they did so based on, the 70 family groups of earth. But he actually parceled it out based on these, watcher angels that was part of this divine council. And I thought that was really cool. Well, I'll just point out a couple more things, and maybe I intrigued you to go buy the book. I think it's really neat. As you saw, Elohim doesn't just mean, God the Father, God the Trinity. It points to that the natural state is the heavenly realm, and it's applied to this divine council. It's applied to angels. And I think, if I remember right, and I don't want to trip up on this, I think even some of the fallen angels were considered Elohim. And so, small g God is kind of where he goes with that, just to keep it separate, that, the Trinity is far and apart set above, but Elohim applies to them because they are part of the heavenly order. The term for Christ, the only begotten, I'm not sure if I spelled that right, the only begotten, he said, is also a mistranslation of Greek, and this only came to light more recently. But Jesus, isn't only begotten in the way we would think of it. It's only and unique is what that Greek word was under there, and so it changes the notion or the preconception of what we have when only begotten is used, especially in the New Testament. Satan, too, might be one of those that we don't quite get. Kind of like Elohim, there may be more than one Satan, and I'm waiting for him to elaborate on this one. He mentioned it, and then I think there's going to be elaboration later, I'm presuming, in the book. But there is one primary adversary, and that is, the Satan that we would talk about. And he's the serpent in the Genesis account, the Nakash. But Satan appears to also be the role of an adversary in front of this divine council. So if you think about the divine council as being almost like a courtroom setting with one judge and then, sub judges or people or, angelic realm that render opinions and offer, advice to the council. You know how you have a prosecuting attorney that then brings the charges. There may be a role that is Satan as well as a primary adversary, Satan. So he hasn't quite elaborated on that one, but it's already got me kind of intrigued. He's being careful with the serpent in the garden, the Nakash, and how that's used in the Bible. And he's sort of now drawing parallels about how Satan's used in the Bible, and I don't have the conclusion yet, so I can't comment on it. And then he lands Nephilim, which there's a lot of smoke around Nephilim. And, he's confirming that the root of that word came out of ancient Babylon, and it would have pointed directly to giants. And I know, Steve Quayle is the master of all the giant stuff out there because he's been studying it forever, and he would say that Nephilim points to the fallen angels, not necessarily the offspring. But I think this Dr. Michael Heiser is making a great argument that it is the offspring giants, and then the fall or the fallen part of it is probably a misinterpretation when people say Nephal in the Hebrew points to fallen ones, which could be the angels or the offspring. He goes back and says, just like I'm maybe from Minnesota as an example, you'd expect to hear from us oofta and, yeah, you betcha. And you would, to anybody in the country, you would know in the U.S. here that the North has a Scandinavian descent. And the terms like that would be offshoot language from that descent. And that's what he's saying, like Nephilim is that it's from Babylonian / Aramaic descent, and it speaks to giants, not necessarily that notion of falling. And he does a word study on that. And so a lot of stuff that, we poke our nose into on this channel, a bunch of it being confirmed, like the B'nai Elohim, and then a bunch of clarity around some of these word studies is really interesting. And then I'm still waiting to see what he's going to do here with the whole notion of Satan. He makes these arguments in very logical order, and then he defends against all the other interpretations, which sometimes is really neat. Like, the sons of Seth thing, I think he pretty well destroyed um, when we look at the sons of God. But it does get frustrating. Things that, none of us lay people would debate. We just understand. He defends against, I guess, what are um, scholarly alternative views of some things that for me it feels like, okay, I just want to skip a few pages here and get that argument over because it wasn't a debate or open in my mind. But he defends against the criticism that he sees in the scholarly world on some of these viewpoints, which belabors the point a little bit. But um, in general, I think this book is really awesome. So I'm just going to give it a little bit of an endorsement here. And I'm sure there's going to be another video before I hit the end of the book here, because there's so many gold nuggets here just before I'm 70 pages in or something. There's so many gold nuggets that I'm just assuming I'm going to read the whole book this time. So God bless you, saints. I hope this was a little bit of a blessing anyways. And you know what? Keep looking up. You see all these things going on in the Middle East, and it just feels like the noose is tightening a little bit. And I don't know. I'm as anxious as anybody. I don't know when the day the Lord's coming for his children, but how long can it be? You don't see things backing up. You see things accelerating, would be my personal opinion. And, you got to pray for individuals and pray blessings on Israel and for God's children. But I'm past the point of thinking you're going to have a big revival where, like this election coming up, I don't think you can turn the tide in the U.S. by just picking the right one person for president. But, don't slam on me if you think that door is still open. I'm just giving you a personal opinion, not any theology. I just see, the prophetic elements of the Bible taking shape so fast that's just hard to imagine. And God can do anything he wants, but it's hard to imagine it rolling back. And from 1 Thessalonians 5, we see that most people are taken by surprise by the day coming. I personally think if he doesn't come get us soon, it won't be a surprise kind of in the way the Bible describes, because so many people are out here talking about this stuff that we're seeing. Maybe it's just the people that have hardened their heart against anything biblical will still be a majority and be caught off guard. But boy, you just look at anything from the stuff going on above our heads to the sinkholes and the earthquakes and the Middle East wars and the stuff that's going on. You'd have to be ignorant and hardened against the Bible to not see what's happening, or intentionally. Maybe the best thing is just intentionally avoiding the discussion around the Bible, because it's not just the Christians that are saying this is the end days. We've covered a dozen articles coming out of Israel that the Jewish rabbis say it's here, it's here, it's here. And you've got Islam, both Sunni and Shia, that would argue from maybe slightly different viewpoint that it's here, it's here. So in terms of faith systems, you've covered a huge footprint. And even the Pope, and all the stuff he's doing, it just seems like it's here. So God bless you, saints. Take care.